Hi everyone, this is my preaching autobiographical video essay. So I have always loved stories. As a kid, I would beg my parents nightly to read a book or to tell me a story of when they were a kid. If they were able, I'd beg them to keep going chapter after chapter, or if they couldn't think of a story from their childhood, I would be completely open for them to simply make one up. I love stories. It is to no surprise, then, that the captivation of my faith was found through the gospel stories. Nor is it surprising that my call to ministry has been centered on the telling of God's great story. As a director of student ministries, I preach weekly to our students and have had opportunities to speak at retreats for communities of students outside of my church. I have also had the privilege to preach twice for a Sunday morning service, once at my home church and once at a visiting church. While my current ministry position keeps me from listening to sermons in person, I often try to listen to recorded sermons on my own. When I listen to a sermon, I always appreciate when the preacher makes the story the main focus. I love when he or she provides context and history to help make the words come to life. In the opportunities I've had to teach and preach, I do my best to invite my listeners into the story, giving careful attention to the context and giving space for any needed imagination. I also appreciate when the preacher provides their own stories to help make the passage applicable to our 21st century life, though this is something I personally have found challenging in my own preaching. How do preachers find such perfectly suited stories? That's what I want to know. And the opportunity a preacher has to share God's word is worthy of careful attention, especially as church communities often make the sermon and preacher something they are not meant to be. As a participant in large church bodies, I have found myself disheartened by the obsession over the sermon and preacher. I've seen too many brothers and sisters treat the sermon as their only spiritual substance of the week. They come to church just to receive and not to know. They come to take without a consideration to give. Often these folks put the giver of the sermon onto a pedestal they were never meant to be on, which puts their own heart and the heart of the preacher into a very challenging position. Because of challenges such as these, I am so eager to take this class. Who is ever worthy of speaking of God? And who can don flesh and claim to know the mysteries of God? No one. Yet God calls us to preach. Jesus tells us to share his truth and his teaching. I'm taking this class because I want to learn how to do so effectively. By the end of this quarter, I hope to feel confident in the content of my sermons. The subjects, lessons, and stories I craft together should bring my listeners to the throne of God. I hope to feel confident in what to study and how to structure my content to make the sermons I give worthy of the opportunity I'm given. By the end of the quarter, I also hope to feel confident in the physical recitation of my sermon. While the content of what I say is so important, I know the way I physically present it has the capacity to distract listeners or misconstrue the meaning of my message. I hope to have the right tools to practice speaking effectively. Beyond my own ability to preach, my goal in this class is to have a deeper understanding of the role of a sermon. I hope to have a better sense of how to keep preaching in its proper place, encouraging others to not over-exaggerate its importance or treat it without its due reverence. Finally, in Jesus' parting words in Matthew, he tells his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations. Later on, he says, and teaching them to obey everything I have commanded you. In the book of Acts and the rest of the New Testament, we see the disciples doing this. They wrote and recited messages to one another as the young church was built. Their messages reminded the church of Jesus' teaching and helped them apply Jesus' truth to their lived-in context and daily challenges. as we continue to live in the light, as we continue to live in light of God's great story, I hope to see our class learn from those who've gone before us. Let us pick up the mantle of responsibility as church leaders today, and let us study and practice the communication of God's word. Ultimately, let us yield to our good shepherd as we learn to feed our flocks with his truth. Thanks all.